Okay, so we've been having a good time celebrating hip-hop's 50th birthday and looking at all the ways it has changed the culture. Today on the podcast, that journey continues. We are taking a look at how Quebec's hip-hop scene was born and how hip-hop overcame the language barrier. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, take a listen to this.
Ne m'appelle pas, ne m'attends pas, car au fond sur l'autoroute 20. Je ne sais plus trop où je vais, mais au moins je sais d'où je viens. Je suis sur mon grind, le vent dans le dos. Tu veux du live, viens me voir en show. Je suis sur les planches comme à la guerre, le poids des mots sur mes épaules. Je suis sur
A bit of Autoroute 20 by Soulja, one of the biggest rap acts out of Quebec right now. Listen, this year marks the 50th anniversary of what we now consider to be the birthday of hip-hop. And over the past few months, we've been looking at hip-hop's rise and evolution over the last few decades. We've taken a look at rap's history in Toronto. We've taken a look at the indigenous hip-hop scene in Canada. And also, we've looked at hip-hop in the UK and hip-hop in India. Well, guess what? Today we're looking at rap's history in Quebec and also its influence in Quebec. Commotion regular Nantali Indongo was born and raised in the province. She's also an emcee and a day one rap fan herself. I spoke to her recently about Quebec's rap history and the role that language played in its rise. Nantali started by giving us a sense of where hip-hop was first being heard in Quebec in the late 70s and early 80s. Take a listen to this.
Well, I think at this point, in the 70s, 80s, it was really happening at blocos, held at schoolyards and parks, community centers. And there's one key figure, a DJ named Butcher T, who was really important in, we say, bringing that blocko culture here, particularly hip. At the time, it wasn't even called hip hop, right? It was called the breaks.
Yeah.
So, but bringing that style of playing music. So the culture was here. Eventually, it transitioned to community radio shows. Not even community radio shows. There was a show called Club 980, hosted by Michael Williams, where he would let MCs come in and rap during the show.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people weren't necessarily pressing records just yet in the 70s and 80s of quote unquote rap releases, but they were circulating their music because when people could, and if they had the access, they would record their music on cassette tapes,
right,
and share their music. And MCs were all a part of that decor. It was DJs and MCs working together.
Well, I was to say, in preparation for this very conversation, you sent us a YouTube clip of the Classy crew. They're throwing down on this local Montreal TV show called Nightlife with the host Peter King. Man, the hair on Peter King, like that's like a timestamp. That's incredible. The matching sweaters on the Classy crew. Why was that a moment for you?
Well, I mean, because we're talking about 1983. We're talking about 1983. We're talking about, even brief as it was, like visibility on television. We're talking about two young women who were MCs. They were from a historically Black neighborhood. They're from Little Burgundy, and MCs, including Classy Crew, but other MCs like MC Flight, Shanwan. These artists were performing even with the new American rap crews. They were new at the time, like Fat Boys and MC Light.
Well, so new that they just learned how to rap like a few months before they got on the performance, right?
Exactly. So they came to Montreal to do shows, and our local rappers were performing, opening for these acts.
Let's talk about you for a moment. You were born and raised in Montreal. Your parents moved to Quebec from the Caribbean in the late 50s. What's your most vivid early hip-hop memory?
I would have to say, two things. Seeing Beach Street, the film, in theaters, and then eventually Wild Style. And then also, going to the blockos that I could go to as a kid that were daytime parties, for example, and seeing a lot of my older cousins kind of test out the hip hop DJ techniques. It was just a part of the culture in especially in Black Caribbean Anglo communities here.
You know what's amazing is that every time we have one of these conversations about hip hop history, and we've had a few of those now, every time I listen to someone describe that moment in their youth, I kind of go like, I wish I was there. Like, I wish I was going to Blockos with you. That sounds amazing.
It was.
The energy sounds like and also we just don't have a culture of daytime parties. So let's bring that back. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay. That's a whole other thing. I'm gonna try not to go down this tangent too far, because you are a tour guide today. You picked a bunch of songs for us to play while we talk, and we are going to start with this one.
C'est quoi ton nom déjà?
The year is 1990. Me and Nantali are going to a Blocko right now. Nantali, what are we listening to? What is this, and why is it important?
All right, so the group is called MRF, and MRF or MRF in French stands for Mouvement Rap Français, or so French rap movement, really. And they were a crew, Cool Rock and JT. They were actually rappers in the 80s who were rapping in English, even though it wasn't their first language.
Oh, wow.
And they spoke French, but they weren't using it to rap. So they too were performing with Public Enemy and Big Daddy Kane, but they were rapping in English at the time. And then something clicked for them. Cool Rock in particular was like, you know what? I think I want to try this out in French and see what's up. And so that's exactly what they did. Interestingly enough, through a connection with Michie Me, they went to Toronto to record this first album, which was in French. And that really set something off that kind of signaled to other people who were interested in the art form here in Quebec who spoke French that perhaps you could rap in French.
As you can imagine, not the first time that Michie Me has come up as we talk about the history of rap in this country, of course. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in this transition of, you start rapping in English and then you say, you know what, let's see what we can do in French. Could you just talk about some of the other ways that language played into the way that hip-hop developed in Quebec?
I mean, so much of hip hop culture and rap in particular is about authenticity, right? And it's about identity shaping, whatever your identity is. So whatever story you're telling in your rhymes, that story has to be as close as possible to your reality.
Right.
For those of us who are purists anyways. So in the early days, I think really what happens with rapping in French as it starts to develop in Quebec, but then also in France. We're thinking about IAM put out their huge rap group from Marseille. They put out their album in 1991. It starts to give, white Francophone Quebecers, especially, and then also immigrant Quebecers who have French as their first language. Specifically Haitians at the time, because they were the big other population of French speakers here in the 80s and 90s, it gives them, license to say, hey, I can actually express myself in this art form and using the language that I know best. And then over time, eventually, this becomes the groundwork for a music industry in the Quebec music industry, which wasn't necessarily, committed to hip hop music as yet. But they started to see maybe there's potential here for a music genre in French and a market, therefore. But of course, we hear the story all the time about how rap and hip hop culture was not embraced by Canadian music industry for a very long time. Yeah. It was the same thing in Quebec. It still took a long time for it to really catch on. And as well, it also meant that there were challenges and maybe some kind of a stunting for those rappers in Quebec who were expressing themselves in English.
And now you're a slave to the sound wave, trapped for eternity and can't be saved because you're in too deep. All thoughts I keep when I hypnotize, I put heads to sleep. I create a force between time and space. Elements known, hardcore face. The beast within is your worst nightmare.
That is Zero Tolerance. The song is called Dark Side of the Groove. Again, the year is 1992. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. What you listen to right now is Commotion. And today on the podcast, we're taking a look at the history of rap in Quebec with one of our regulars, Nantali Indongo. Nantali, what can you tell me about Dark Side of the Groove?
Oh man, this is the only record that Zero Tolerance rap duo, actually trio. So there's Chuck Ice, there's D Trace, and there's DJ Choice. And they're from Chuck Ice and D Trace are from a neighborhood in Montreal called La Salle, where there was a big Black community. And Chuck Ice said to me, he was like, me rapping and coming out of La Salle and doing all these big shows, he opened for Fat Boys, et cetera, et cetera. He's like, we were able to put La Salle on the map because there were other neighborhoods that were more popular with the Blockos, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And Zero Tolerance just is considered, a pioneer English rap group. They managed to press that record. They had a brief moment with a label. Some things happened where they couldn't pursue, they couldn't actually finish the agreement with the label, some changes in Chuck Ice's personal life. And so they only put out that record, Dark Side of the Groove, but people still remember, people connected with it. They were considered, that they're repping for us. And the style of rap, like if you see videos of them performing, they were definitely looking for, to be at the same level as the Naughty by Natures and those kinds of rap groups.
Yes.
Like they were bringing that kind of flow back then. And it was just interesting. I meant to say earlier about that question around Quebec music industry. It really was interesting to see who got a chance to get signed to a label or get music pressed on vinyl.
Right.
So much so there was a French rock star who put out a song in 1983 called Le Rap à Billy. And this artist is Lucien Francoeur, and he's trying to rap, but it's really like a spoken word situation, and he's mixing rap and rock and whatever. But he was a known artist, and he happened to be in New York at some point as hip hop was becoming a thing, and he got to put out a record, but not so much for English rappers here.
I mean, that's one of the themes of rap's evolution, right? Is that it sort of has forced itself upon the mainstream in ways that maybe the mainstream didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
There's so much resistance to it, but then it becomes and stays so popular with young people that it becomes, a movement, and then that movement becomes one of the mainstays of pop. We should say by the mid to late 90s, rap music was this indisputable force permeating all of pop culture already, not just in North America, but across the globe. Mm-hmm. But in Quebec, the genre was taking some pretty interesting turns linguistically and in terms of reach outside the province. Have a listen to this.
Le bug de l'antéchrist arrive, on ne sait même pas où aller. Représenté par Jasmine, descendant de Douané. Se protège ton accueil, y'a le UPI, in and out. C'est la panique totale, freestyle, the criminal. Y'a le plus de justice que de hustlers, qu'une époque triste, toxique. Et combien de cops, puff, puff, dip. La bannière du roi démontrée non dépendance au système. Qui aime, la bête n'est jamais rassasiée, qui traîne. Étable de gestes comme néophyte dans Babylone. Au salaire minimum, plan aluminium. Sur les caves qui m'étonnent. Esclaves qui vivent de rhum. Qui après minuit dans baba.
When I tell you Nantali started just vibing, immediately as the song came on, the year's 1999, you call this a Montreal anthem. What are we listening to?
It absolutely is. This group is called Musayan, and the song is called La Vitineg, or Life, my man, that type of thing. And it is a mix. This trio are three young people born and raised in Montreal, but of Haitian descent. Dramatique, Emcee, and J. Kill. And Emcee and J. Kill are brother and sister, and Dramatique was their friend. They met in high school. And yeah, by the 90s, everybody's trying to do this thing called hip hop and called rap, right? So the story's the same for them. But what is so interesting about what Musayan does for Quebec and for Montreal is that they start to mix French and Creole. Oh, wow. And English.
Oh, wow.
I just caught this line off the top there that you played in the clip where Dramatique uses the word justice. And in French, the word is justice. He could have very well said justice, but for the rhyme purposes and the intricacy of what he's trying to do with writing his rhymes and mixing languages, he says the word in English, even though a third of his bar was in French or Creole, you know? So that was really something that was very special. And it just worked because at that point, there was already a critical mass of Haitian audiences. They mix in that compa beat for their samples. So they're not sampling Black American soul music. They're sampling Caribbean, Haitian music. And that even, you know, I'll tell you straight up, I was dancing because if you went to the club in the 1990s in Montreal and there was a local DJ, they would definitely play this song and we would all jump in because it brought us back to some of our cultural roots, even if we weren't understanding Creole and French.
I was going to say, it sounds like that the reach was even outside of that because they also work with people like Wyclef, yeah?
They did. They did. They did a song with Wyclef, one of his only songs in French, you know, and he performed with them. They toured with them. It was, you know, very, very important that Musayan hit the stage because I think they really opened the gates for a lot more diversity in rap in Quebec.
Okay, so we're going to get into the turn of the century, okay? It's the 2000s. It's worth mentioning that you were an artist. You were a part of a hip-hop band called Nomadic Massive.
You hear me say, yo, bun them cause them a bun you too. Ay, run them cause them a try to run you. Try and turn you fool on. Leave you for dead when they fill up you head with them dibby talk and them dibby walk. Watch.
Let's talk about it. What was that moment like for you?
Well, I had never any intention of being a rapper, even though I grew up very close to the culture as it was growing up here. I used to dance a lot for some of the early groups. Yeah. But I just, even though I was interested in poetry and I was rhyme writing in private, I just never thought that I would end up in that space. But I did. I was friends with the group. And a year after it formed, I joined in, and it was something that I had no idea that I needed to be a part of, really, because with Nomadic Massive, here we were mixing, you know, 6 different languages because of the representation in the group. Yeah. So we had people who were rapping in English, in French, in Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Arabic from Algeria, and mixing it all up. And I was able to bring in some Caribbean patois in there as well. And it was just something. I was in the group for 17 years. They're still kicking. 2024 is going to be 20 years, and Nomadic Massive will be celebrating. But it was key. It was really something special. We kind of continued in the tradition of what Musayan started with language mixing and rap.
I was going to say, like, sounds like a sensitive moment in terms of when to be a hip hop act. So can you just talk a little bit about trying to make it as a rap act within Quebec's music economy back at the time?
Yeah, it was challenging, I think, because in some ways, we really wanted to be accepted as a hip hop act, but because we were using a less traditional format with live instruments and there was a lot of melody and mixing the languages, it was easy to maybe see us as a world music act. So that was a big debate, but we could then use that to our advantage so that we could draw, you know, all kinds of audiences. And we were able to travel a lot and play all kinds of festival circuits, which I think was great just for representation of Canadian hip hop in general, where we could show audiences who thought that they were going to get some sort of reggae band, get something completely different than what they might have expected. But it was hard. Like, we're not considered Nomadic's not considered what is often called rap keb, because we don't rap primarily in French, even though there is French in the music. Yeah. It's not exclusively French. So those things we face some challenges, but we eventually broke through. But it was definitely challenging at times.
Okay, so we've been playing a lot of acts based in Montreal. What we're going to do is take it to Quebec City for a minute.
Bienvenue à Saint-Roch, où c'est que le monde qui des 3/4 club. La capitale du Québec, mince dans le bas. Ben loin de Santa Barbara, ça dépense pas plus que 0 par mois. C'est la climatisée, même dans un pire vague de chaleur. Encore laisse, même s'il y a pas gros bambou.
Nantali, again, with the vibe. And immediately as the song comes on, this is from 2016. Do you want to tell people about this? What do we listen to?
Oh, man. So that MC in particular is Ken Lo, who's rapping. And Ken Lo is a part of a group called À la Claire Ensemble. And they're from Quebec City. Most of them from an area called Saint-Roch, which is one of the older parts of the city. Of course, you start bopping because they were so clever. What they took a known sample. So if people remember, Welcome to Jamrock.
Welcome to Jamrock. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So Damian Marley and then
Nas.
And then Nas and Little Kim reuses it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a recognizable sound, and he's flipping it. They're flipping it by rapping not only in French, but in Quebec joual, and using expressions and ideas that are specific to the Quebec Francophone experience. And in their case, Saint-Roch, because the song is about repping where they're from, which is repping that neighborhood. And I just feel that they just did something really special, because they started to, not only were they were mixing language, but they were using a lot more joual. They still used a bit of English as well. But they were also very creative. So they weren't doing a traditional format in terms of, they were a big posse crew. Everybody is a killer MC in that crew. Yeah. They were very theatrical. Their videos would have costumes and all that kind of stuff. I felt that they brought a creativity to rap music here that was maybe not yet at a level, but they especially, I feel, were the group that kind of started the trend of what we now refer to as rap keb. So MRF is the great-grandfather or the grandfather of rap keb, but the term itself was not yet used. Yeah. And because of À la Claire's insistence to rep Quebec identity, whichever way, like Quebec stories, basically, Quebec's stories of identity, that rap keb label starts to really begin to sink in with what they are doing.
Well, I was going to say, when I hear that sample, when I hear that particular flow that was used in Welcome to Jamrock, like, it immediately ties the song to a tradition, right? It's sort of like, there is the song and its context, but also that's what hip hop does so well, is that the best of hip hop is in conversation with the other best of hip hop, right? Like, it's like, here we're speaking the same way that you are speaking from your position. We got one more song to close our chat on. We asked you to pick something that speaks to the future of rap in Quebec. What is your pick? What are you going to take us out on?
Well, I think I'm going to take you out on Par Hasard's track. The song is called Or, or Gold, and it's featuring another local artist. She's a singer. Her name is Vanessa. But I think this is a perfect example of the direction of rap in Quebec.
Let's get to it. Nantali, in the meantime, thank you so much for being here. This is the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Là tout va mal, ça s'arrête pas, j'ai besoin de répit. Je me sens seul, j'ai plus sommeil, toujours pas d'appétit. Y'a trop de haine qui sévit, moi quand je saigne, je vous souris. Un peu de peine, de nostalgie, méchant cocktail qui tue ma vie.
Je te dirais d'aller doucement, jamais mettre tes rêves en suspens. Fais gaffe à ceux qui me manquent quand ils chantent. De nos jours, tout s'achète et tout se vend. Les peines posées sur ta feuille seront tes plus beaux pansements.
Ok, j'ai fait le tour de la ville, je roule pour dégager mes peines. Et là je vois ma vie qui défile. J'attends toujours le big day, réussir c'est ça.
A bit of Par Hasard featuring Onessa. That song is called Or, the final pick from our Quebec rap tour guide, Nantali Indongo. Nantali is the host and producer of The Bridge, a show about Quebec arts and culture for CBC. You can catch past episodes of The Bridge on CBC Listen app. And that is it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of this show wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm wondering if you could do me a favor right now. If you could follow the show's Instagram. Our Instagram is @CommotionCBC. Find us there. We've got a lot of fun little extra videos that you can find. And you know what? I'm going to be back tomorrow. I hope to see you then.